The silence of space stretched endlessly around the ISS Vanguard, a sleek human warship designed for exploration and defense. Captain Ryan Holt stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the vast expanse of stars. His brown eyes were sharp but weary, reflecting years of service and humanity's push into the unknown. The crew worked quietly around him, their movements precise and efficient. The mission had been straightforward: investigate an anomaly detected near a dying star in a sector that should have been empty. But what they found was anything but ordinary. Lieutenant Karen Blake sat at her station, her fingers dancing over the controls as she analyzed the incoming data. Her blonde hair was tied neatly into a bun, and her face showed a mix of curiosity and unease. She had joined the military straight out of college, driven by a desire to explore the mysteries of the universe. Now, staring at the readings on her screen, she felt a chill run down her spine. Something about this discovery didn't sit right with her. "Captain," Karen said finally, breaking the quiet hum of activity on the bridge, "you need to see this." Ryan turned away from the viewport and walked over to her station. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on the monitor. The readings displayed there told a story no one aboard the Vanguard could have anticipated. There, floating silently near the edge of the dying star's gravitational pull, was a massive structure, a ship. Not just any ship, but one unmistakably human-made. "This can't be right," Ryan muttered under his breath. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, his mind racing through possibilities. According to all records, no human vessel had ever ventured this far into uncharted space. This sector was supposed to be untouched, barren, devoid of life or technology. Yet here it was, a relic of humanity standing stark against the emptiness of space. Karen nodded slowly, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I double-checked. The scans. It's real, and it's definitely human." Chief Engineer Lucas Ford approached them, his tall frame moving with deliberate steps. His dark skin glistened faintly under the soft lighting of the bridge, and his expression was one of cautious intrigue. "How is that even possible?" he asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "We're talking about a region of space where humans haven't set foot in centuries. If this thing is old enough to predate our expansion, well, let's just say I'm not sure we're ready for whatever secrets it holds." Security Officer Megan Hayes chimed in from across the room. She stood near the weapons console, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her sidearm. "Secrets or not, we've got orders to investigate," she reminded them firmly. Her short brown hair framed a face marked by determination and experience. "If there's a chance this ship has valuable intel, or worse, if someone else gets to it before us, we can't afford to ignore it." Ryan nodded, though his jaw tightened slightly. He appreciated Megan's pragmatism, but something about this situation gnawed at him. It wasn't just the improbability of finding a human ship so far from home. It was the way it loomed there, silent and still, like a ghost haunting the void. Whatever lay inside might hold answers, but it could also bring danger. "All right," Ryan said after a moment, turning to address the entire crew. "We'll proceed with caution. Lieutenant Blake, keep monitoring those scans. I want to know everything you can tell me about that ship before we get any closer. Chief Ford, prepare the shuttle bay in case we need to send a team aboard. And Megan," he paused, meeting her gaze directly, "make sure your team is ready for anything." "Yes, sir," Megan replied without hesitation. As the crew sprang into action, Ryan returned to the viewport. He studied the distant silhouette of the mysterious ship, its jagged edges catching the dim light of the dying star. It looked ancient, battle-scarred, its once gleaming hull now pitted and worn. Whoever or whatever had built it had clearly seen conflict. The question was whether they had survived it. Time seemed to slow as the Vanguard closed the distance between itself and the derelict ship. Each passing second brought new details into focus, and with them came fresh waves of unease. The design was familiar yet alien, reminiscent of ships from humanity's early days of interstellar travel but modified in ways that defied explanation. Strange markings adorned parts of the hull, symbols etched deep into the metal. They weren't written in any language, Ryan recognized, but they sent a shiver down his spine nonetheless. "Captain," Karen called out again, interrupting his thoughts. "I'm picking up faint energy signatures coming from within the ship. It's weak, almost like it's barely holding together. But it's active." Ryan frowned. "Active? After all this time?" "It doesn't make sense," Karen admitted. "But the readings are clear. Some systems are still online." Lucas whistled softly. "Whoever built this must have known what they were doing. Keeping a ship operational for centuries out here. That's impressive and terrifying." Ryan nodded, his mind racing. If the ship truly was as old as it appeared, then whoever had crewed it would be long gone. But what had happened to them? Had they perished, abandoned their vessel, or met some other fate entirely? And why had they come to this desolate corner of the galaxy in the first place? As the Vanguard drew nearer, the crew began to notice more peculiarities. The ship's shape suggested it had been designed for combat, with reinforced armor plating and weapon mounts visible along its length. Yet there were no signs of external damage consistent with warfare. No scorch marks, no blast craters, just the slow decay of time and exposure to the harsh environment of space. Could it have been a colony ship? Karen wondered aloud. Maybe they were looking for a new home and never made it. Or maybe they did, Lucas countered grimly, and whatever they found didn't want visitors. Megan stepped closer to the viewport, her eyes narrowing as she studied the derelict. "Either way, we won't know until we go inside. Let's hope whoever or whatever is waiting for us isn't armed." Ryan glanced at her, appreciating her bluntness. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," he said. "For now, let's focus on getting close enough to establish contact. Lieutenant Blake, try hailing them, see if anyone's listening." Karen nodded and began working the communications panel. She adjusted frequencies, sending out a series of standard greeting signals in multiple languages. For several tense minutes, there was only silence in response. Then, just as Ryan was about to order another attempt, a crackling sound filled the bridge. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakably artificial. Static gave way to a voice, low and gravelly, speaking in broken fragments. "Hold position. Do not board." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the crew staring at each other. In stunned silence, Ryan straightened, his expression hardening. "Did anyone catch that?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "It sounded like a warning," Megan said, her grip tightening on her weapon. "Like they don't want us getting too close. Or like they're trying to protect us," Karen added quietly. Ryan considered both possibilities. Whoever or whatever had sent that message clearly knew they were there. Whether it was a remnant of the original crew or something else entirely remained to be seen. One thing was certain, though. Turning back wasn't an option. "Prepare a boarding party," Ryan ordered. "We're going in." The decision hung heavy in the air, but no one argued. They were explorers, soldiers, and scientists, people trained to face the unknown. Still, as the Vanguard maneuvered into docking position alongside the derelict ship, an unspoken fear lingered among them. Out here, in the cold reaches of space, humanity wasn't supposed to exist, yet somehow it did, and that fact alone was enough to make anyone uneasy. When the airlock sealed shut and the boarding team stepped onto the alien ship, the true mystery began. The airlock hissed as it sealed shut behind the boarding team, locking them into the derelict ship. Captain Reinhold led the group, his boots clanging softly against the metal floor. The sound echoed eerily through the corridors, bouncing off walls that hadn't seen human activity in centuries, or so they assumed. Behind him followed Lieutenant Karen Blake, her scanner held tightly in front of her like a shield. Chief Engineer Lucas Ford brought up the rear, his tool belt clinking with every step, while Security Officer Megan Hayes kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, her hand never straying far from her weapon. The interior of the ship was dimly lit by emergency lights that flickered sporadically, casting long shadows across the narrow passageways. Dust coated every surface, thick enough to muffle their footsteps, but disturbed now by their presence. It swirled lazily in the stale air, catching faint glimmers of light and making it seem alive. The atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive, as though the weight of time itself pressed down on them. Ryan glanced at his crew, noting the tension etched onto their faces. This wasn't just another mission. This place carried an aura of dread that none of them could shake. "This feels wrong," Megan muttered under her breath, breaking the silence. Her voice was low but sharp, cutting through the eerie quiet like a blade. "It's too quiet, too dead." Ryan nodded slightly, though he didn't respond aloud. He shared her unease, but knew better than to let it show. As the leader, he had to project confidence even if he didn't feel it. Instead, he focused on moving forward, guiding the team deeper into the ship. Every step revealed more about its condition: rusted panels, exposed wiring, and walls scarred by what looked like claw marks or some other form of violent damage. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been peaceful. Karen stopped suddenly, her scanner beeping rapidly. She crouched down beside a console embedded in the wall, brushing away layers of dust to reveal faded buttons beneath. "There's still power running through parts of the ship," she said, her tone equal parts excitement and apprehension. "Not much, but enough for basic systems. If I can access the logs, we might figure out who these people were and why they're here." Lucas knelt beside her, inspecting the console with a practiced eye. "Let me take a look," he offered, pulling a small device from his belt. He connected it to the console, his fingers flying over the keys as lines of code scrolled across the tiny screen. After a moment, he frowned. The system's corrupted. Whoever maintained this ship didn't do a great job of keeping it intact. It'll take some time to dig anything useful out of this mess. "Time we don't have," Megan interjected sharply. She gestured toward the darkness ahead. "We need to keep moving. Standing around won't get us answers any faster." Ryan raised a hand to silence her. "Megan's right, we can't stay in one spot for too long. But we also can't afford to miss critical information. Karen, see what you can salvage quickly. Lucas, keep working on that console. Megan and I will scout ahead and make sure the path is clear." Without waiting for confirmation, Ryan motioned for Megan to follow him. Together, they moved cautiously down the corridor, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The deeper they went, the stranger the ship became. Strange symbols etched into the walls caught their attention. Angular shapes and patterns that seemed almost alien despite their human origin. Some of the markings glowed faintly, pulsing with a soft, unnatural light that made Ryan's skin crawl. "I don't know," Ryan admitted, "but they weren't part of standard ship designs back when this thing was built. Someone added them later, or maybe whoever designed this ship wasn't entirely human." Megan shot him a skeptical glance. "You really think aliens could have helped build this? Seems like a stretch." "I'm not saying it's aliens," Ryan clarified, "but there's something off about all of this. Like this ship has been touched by something beyond our understanding." They continued onward, their flashlights revealing more unsettling details. Doors hung ajar, their mechanisms frozen. Mid-motion, furniture lay overturned, as though the occupants had fled in a hurry. Personal belongings littered the floor: photographs, journals, even children's toys. Ryan picked up a framed picture, wiping away the dust to reveal smiling faces staring back at him. A family. They looked happy, normal, completely unremarkable, except for the fact that they shouldn't exist here, in this forgotten corner of space. "These people had lives," Megan said quietly, peering over his shoulder. "Families, dreams, and now, nothing." Ryan set the frame down gently, his expression grim. "We'll find out what happened to them. That's why we're here." As they rounded a corner, the corridor opened up into a larger chamber, a common area, perhaps, or a mess hall. Tables and chairs were scattered haphazardly, some overturned, others broken. In the center of the room stood a large display screen, cracked and dark, but still functional enough to emit a faint hum. Ryan approached it cautiously, examining the controls. With a hesitant press of a button, the screen flickered to life, displaying fragmented images and text. "Looks like someone tried to leave a message," Megan observed, stepping closer to examine the content. The words were jumbled, incomplete sentences flashing across the screen in rapid succession. Asterisk, "We failed. They are coming. Do not trust the stars." Asterisk, "What does that even mean?" Megan demanded, frustration creeping into her voice. "Who's they? And what does trusting the stars have to do with anything?" Ryan shook his head, equally baffled. Maybe it's a warning. Or maybe whoever wrote this was losing their mind. He tapped the screen again, trying to stabilize the feed, but it only grew worse, the text dissolving into static, before going dark altogether, before they could investigate further. A sudden noise echoed through the chamber, a metallic groan, followed by the distant sound of footsteps. Both Ryan and Megan froze, their heads snapping toward the source of the sound. It came from deeper within the ship, beyond the chamber, and into darker, unexplored territory. "Did you hear that?" Megan whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. "I heard it," Ryan confirmed, his voice barely audible. He signaled for her to follow him as they crept toward the sound, their movements slow and deliberate. The footsteps grew louder, more distinct, accompanied by the occasional scrape of metal against metal. Whoever or whatever it was close. When they reached the next doorway, Ryan paused, holding up a fist to signal Megan to stop. Peering cautiously around the frame, he scanned the adjacent hallway. At first it appeared empty. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement, a shadow shifting at the far end of the corridor. It darted out of sight almost instantly, leaving Ryan unsure whether he'd actually seen it or imagined it. "There's something here," he murmured, turning back to Megan. "Stay sharp." She nodded, her grip tightening on her weapon. "Think it's one of the crew." "It's possible," Ryan replied, "but I doubt it. This ship's been abandoned for centuries. Whoever wore whatever that is, it's not human anymore." They pressed on, their nerves stretched taut. The sensation of being watched grew stronger with each step, as though unseen eyes tracked their every move. The air seemed colder now, biting at their skin despite the ship's failing life support systems. Ryan's instincts screamed at him to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the Vanguard, but he pushed the urge aside. They needed answers, no matter the cost. Eventually, they reached a sealed door, its surface marked with the same strange symbols they'd seen earlier. Unlike the others, however, this one pulsed with a steady, rhythmic glow, as though alive. Ryan hesitated, studying it closely. There was something hypnotic about the pattern, something that made his thoughts blur and wander. Shaking his head to clear it, he reached for the control panel beside the door. "Wait," Megan warned, grabbing his arm. "What if opening this triggers something? We don't know what's on the other side." "We'll never know unless we check," Ryan countered, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. Taking a deep breath, he activated the mechanism. The door slid open with a low rumble, revealing a cavernous chamber bathed in an eerie blue light. Inside, rows of cryogenic pods lined the walls, their transparent lids fogged with frost. Most were dark and inactive, but a few emitted a faint hum, their status indicators blinking steadily. Ryan stepped closer, peering into one of the active pods. Inside lay a man, his features pale and gaunt, but unmistakably human. Tubes and wires connected him to the pod's systems, keeping him suspended in stasis. "He's alive," Ryan breathed, stunned. "How is that even possible?" Megan joined him, her expression grim. And how many others are like him? What happens when we wake them up? Ryan didn't answer. His mind raced with questions, possibilities, and fears. These survivors, if that's what they were, had endured unimaginable horrors. But what had driven them to this state? And what would they awaken to find? As they stood there, contemplating their next move, a low guttural growl echoed through the chamber. Both Ryan and Megan spun around, their weapons raised, searching for the source of the sound. The shadows shifted again, coalescing into a shape that loomed taller than any human. Its outline was indistinct, wavering like smoke, but its presence was undeniable. "Get ready," Ryan whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "This isn't over yet." The figure lunged forward, and chaos erupted. The figure lunged forward with unnatural speed, its shadowy form rippling like liquid darkness. Ryan and Megan barely had time to react as it surged toward them, its movements jerky, yet deliberate. Instinct took over, and both of them opened fire, their weapons spitting bursts of energy into the gloom. The shots hit their mark, sending sparks flying off the creature's surface, but it didn't falter. Instead, it seemed to absorb the blasts, growing larger and more menacing with each passing second. "What is that thing?" Megan shouted, her voice strained with panic as she backed away while continuing to fire. Her weapon's hum filled the chamber, but the creature showed no signs of slowing down. "I don't know," Ryan replied, his own weapon trained on the advancing shape. He fired again, aiming for what he hoped was its center, but the creature merely swayed, its form shifting and reforming as though it were made of smoke. "It's not human." The realization hit him hard. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't part of the crew, or at least, not anymore. It moved with an intelligence that felt alien, predatory, as if it had been lying in wait for centuries, just for this moment. The air around them grew colder, almost suffocating, as the creature let out another low growl, a sound that vibrated deep in their chests. "We need to fall back," Ryan yelled, grabbing Megan's arm and pulling her toward the doorway. They couldn't fight this thing, not here, not without knowing more about it. Their priority now was survival. Megan nodded, her training kicking in despite the fear clawing at her mind. She turned and ran alongside Ryan, their boots pounding against the metal floor as they retraced their steps. Behind them, the creature followed, its footsteps heavy and uneven, accompanied by the scrape of claws, or something equally sharp, dragging along the walls. The noise echoed through the corridors, relentless and deafening, pushing them to move faster as they burst back into the common area where they'd found the fragmented messages earlier. Ryan glanced over his shoulder. The creature was gaining on them, its shadow stretching unnaturally long across the walls. Its presence seemed to warp the very light around it, swallowing up the faint glow from the emergency lights. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. Panic wouldn't help them now. "Karen, Lucas," Ryan shouted into his communicator as they sprinted down the hallway. "We've got trouble. Meet us at the airlock now." Static crackled in response before Karen's voice came through, shaky but clear. "What kind of trouble?" "Something big," Ryan snapped. "Just get there." They rounded a corner, skidding to a halt when they saw Karen and Lucas ahead, standing near the airlock hatch. Both looked startled, their expressions shifting to alarm as they spotted the two running figures, and the monstrous shape closing in behind them. "What is that?" Karen gasped, taking an involuntary step back. Her scanner slipped from her hands, clattering loudly on the floor. "No time to explain," Ryan barked. "Seal the hatch, and get ready to override the lock if we need to leave fast." Lucas sprang into action, his fingers flying over the control panel beside the hatch. The door began to slide shut, but the creature was too close. With a final lunge, it slammed into the narrowing gap, forcing its way through before the mechanism could fully close. The impact sent shards of metal flying, and the team scrambled backward, their weapons raised once more. It's inside, Megan cried, firing wildly at the creature as it loomed over them. Its form shifted again, expanding and contracting like a living storm. Something resembling eyes glowed briefly within its mass, locking onto each of them in turn. The sensation of being watched intensified, pressing down on them like a physical weight. Ryan's mind raced. They couldn't win this fight head-on. The creature was too powerful, too otherworldly. But maybe they didn't have to destroy it. Maybe they could contain it. "Lucas," Ryan called out urgently. "Is there any way to cut power to this section of the ship? Anything to trap it?" Lucas hesitated, glancing nervously at the creature before nodding. "I can reroute the emergency systems, but it'll take a minute. And if I do, we might lose access to the rest of the ship." "Do it," Ryan ordered without hesitation. "We're not staying here any longer. Then we have to." As Lucas worked frantically at the controls, Megan and Karen kept the creature occupied, firing repeatedly to keep it distracted. Each shot seemed to irritate it, causing it to lash out with tendrils of shadow that snaked toward them. One grazed Megan's arm, leaving a burning sensation that made her gasp in pain. She stumbled but quickly recovered, gritting her teeth against the sting. "Hurry up," Megan shouted at Lucas, her voice tight with urgency. "It's getting closer." "I'm almost done," Lucas replied, sweat beading on his forehead as his fingers danced over the panel. Finally, with a triumphant shout, he hit the last button. The lights flickered violently, then went out entirely, plunging the corridor into darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a guttural roar erupted from the creature as it thrashed blindly in the sudden absence of light. The team used the opportunity to retreat, backing away carefully until they reached the safety of the airlock. Ryan slammed his hand on the hatch release, and the door slid shut with a satisfying clang, sealing them off from the chaos beyond. Breathing heavily, the four of them leaned against the walls of the cramped airlock, trying to process what had just happened. The adrenaline coursing through their veins made it hard to think clearly, but one thing was certain: they weren't alone on this ship. That thing, Karen stammered, her face pale. What was it? Was it some kind of alien? "I don't think so," Ryan said grimly. "Not originally anyway. It looked like it used to be human, or, at least, part of it did. Something changed it, twisted it." Lucas nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Remember those symbols we saw earlier? Maybe they're connected, like whoever built this ship tapped into something they shouldn't have." "Great," Megan muttered sarcastically. "So we're dealing with ancient humans who messed around with forces beyond their understanding. Just what we needed." Ryan ignored her sarcasm, focusing instead on their next move. "We need to regroup. That thing isn't going to stay trapped forever, and we still don't know what else is waiting for us on this ship. If we're going to survive, we have to find answers, and fast." Karen bent down to retrieve her scanner, which had fallen during the chaos. She powered it back on, frowning as she reviewed the data. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. "Before we left the cryo chamber, I scanned those pods. Some of them are still active, but not all of them are stable. A few are showing critical errors. If they fail, they'll wake up," Ryan finished for her, his jaw tightening. "And we don't know what condition they'll be in or what they'll remember." "Exactly," Karen confirmed. "If we don't secure that chamber soon, we could have more of those things to deal with." Ryan exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples as he considered their options. Every decision felt like walking blindfolded into a minefield. They couldn't afford to make a mistake, not here, not now. "All right," he said finally. "Here's the plan. We go back to the Vanguard and grab whatever supplies we need to stabilize those pods. Then we return to the cryo chamber and lock it down. After that," he trailed off, his gaze distant. "After that, we'll decide whether to wake anyone up or seal this whole place off and leave it behind." No one argued. Despite their exhaustion and fear, they knew Ryan was right. This mission had gone far beyond simple exploration. Now, it was about survival and uncovering the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. As the airlock cycled open, allowing them to step back aboard the Vanguard, Ryan cast one last glance at the derelict ship. Its silhouette loomed ominously against the backdrop of stars, silent and foreboding. For a brief moment, he thought he saw movement, a flicker of shadow in one of the windows, but when he blinked, it was gone. Whatever secrets this ship held, they weren't going to give them up easily, and as much as Ryan wanted answers, he couldn't shake the feeling that some mysteries were better left buried. Back aboard the ISS Vanguard, the crew gathered in the briefing room, their faces pale and drawn from the ordeal they'd just endured. Captain Ryan Holt stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on its smooth surface as he tried to collect his thoughts. The others sat silently, each lost in their own reflections of what had happened aboard the derelict ship. The creature's shadowy form still lingered in their minds, a specter that refused to fade. "We need to figure out what we're dealing with," Ryan began, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was calm but firm, an anchor for the group as they struggled to process everything. That thing, it wasn't human anymore, but it used to be. Something changed it, and whatever did, that might still be active. Karen nodded slowly, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She had spent the short trip back reviewing the data from her scanner, piecing together fragments of information about the cryogenic pods and the ship itself. "The symbols we saw, they're not random," she said finally, her tone measured but tinged with unease. "They match patterns I've seen before, in old research archives. They're tied to experiments involving consciousness, and something else, something beyond our understanding." Lucas leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing. "You're saying this wasn't just a colony ship or a military vessel? That it was some kind of science experiment?" "Maybe," Karen replied hesitantly. "But if it was, it went horribly wrong. Those pods, some of them are stable, but others are failing. If we don't stabilize them soon, more of those things could wake up, or worse, they could escape." Ryan sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "We can't destroy the ship, not yet. There are still survivors inside those pods, people who deserve a chance to live, assuming we can help them. But Megan's right, we can't risk letting whatever caused this spread." Karen spoke up again, her voice quieter but urgent. "There's one other thing. While we were scanning the ship, I picked up traces of energy readings coming from deeper inside. It's faint, almost like it's dormant, but it matches the same signature as the symbols. Whatever it is, it's connected to what happened to the crew and probably to that creature we fought." "That's where we need to go next," Ryan decided, straightening up. "If we can find the source of that energy, maybe we can figure out how to contain it or shut it down entirely. But we'll need to be careful. We don't know what else is waiting for us." The team exchanged uneasy glances. None of them relished the idea of returning to the derelict ship, especially after their last encounter, but they all knew there was no choice. They had come too far to turn back now. With renewed determination, they began preparing for their second mission, gathering supplies and arming themselves for whatever lay ahead. When they re-entered the derelict ship, the atmosphere felt even heavier than before. The emergency lights had dimmed further, casting long shadows that danced eerily along the walls. The airlock creaked ominously as it sealed shut behind them, locking them once again into the cold embrace of the ancient vessel. Ryan led the way, his weapon drawn and ready, while Megan stayed close behind, scanning their surroundings with sharp, wary eyes. "This place feels different," Lucas muttered under his breath as they moved down the corridor. "Like it knows we're back." "No kidding," Megan shot back, her grip tightening on her weapon. "I half expect that thing to jump out at us again." Ryan didn't respond, though he shared their unease. The ship seemed alive in a way it hadn't before, as if it were watching them, studying their every move. Strange noises echoed through the corridors, soft clicks, distant groans, and the occasional scrape of metal against metal. It was impossible to tell whether these sounds were natural or deliberate, but they kept the team on edge. They followed Karen's scanner toward the source of the energy readings, navigating through increasingly narrow passageways until they reached a massive door marked with the same angular symbols they'd seen earlier. Unlike the others, this door was intact, its surface smooth and unblemished despite the ship's obvious decay. In the center was a circular indentation, glowing faintly with the same blue light they'd encountered in the cryochamber. "What do you think this is?" Ryan asked, gesturing to the door. Karen stepped forward, examining it closely. "It's some kind of lock," she said after a moment. "But it's not mechanical. Look at the patterns there, shifting, changing. It's like it's alive." "Great," Megan muttered sarcastically. "Another mystery to solve. Any ideas on how to open it?" Karen hesitated, then pulled out a small device from her belt. "I can try syncing my scanner to it. Maybe it'll recognize the signal and unlock." As she worked, the rest of the team kept watch, their weapons trained on the surrounding area. The tension was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Via every shadow seemed to move. Every sound carried an ominous weight. Finally, after several tense minutes, Karen let out a soft gasp. The door emitted a low hum, and the glowing patterns began to spin faster, forming intricate designs that pulsed with increasing intensity. Then, with a loud hiss, the door slid open. Beyond it lay a vast chamber, unlike anything they'd seen so far. The walls were covered in the same glowing symbols, arranged in complex patterns that seemed to shift and writhe like living things. At the center of the room stood a towering structure, a crystalline pillar, radiating faint blue light. Its surface was etched with lines and shapes that resembled circuitry, but they pulsed irregularly, as though powered by some unknown force. "What is this place?" Ryan whispered, stepping cautiously into the chamber. "It's beautiful," Karen murmured, her voice filled with awe and terrifying. Lucas frowned, studying the pillar closely. "This isn't technology, at least. Not any kind I've ever seen. It's like it's part machine, part organism. Like it grew here." Before anyone could respond, the pillar suddenly flared brighter, bathing the entire chamber in harsh, blinding light. The crew shielded their eyes instinctively, stumbling backward as the ground beneath their feet vibrated. When the light finally dimmed, they found themselves staring at something new. Holographic images projected around the room, showing scenes of humanity's past. A cityscape appeared first, bustling with life and activity. People walked the streets, smiling and laughing, completely unaware of the danger lurking just beyond their world. Then the image shifted, revealing a starship launching into space, carrying a hopeful crew toward the unknown. But the final scene chilled them to the bone. The same ship, now battered and broken, adrift in a sea of darkness. Figures moved within it, their forms distorted and monstrous, their faces twisted in agony. "Their story," Karen breathed, her voice barely audible. "This is what happened to them." Ryan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "Whatever this pillar is, it's connected to their transformation, to that creature we fought and to whatever's keeping those pods operational." Megan stepped closer to the pillar, her weapon raised. "Then we destroy it. End this nightmare once and for all." "No," Karen exclaimed, grabbing Megan's arm to stop her. "We can't. If this thing powers the pods, destroying it could kill everyone inside. We'd be condemning them without giving them a chance." "She's right," Ryan interjected, placing himself between Megan and the pillar. "We came here to save lives, not end them. But we also can't leave this thing active. It's too dangerous." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "What if we disable it instead? Shut it down temporarily, so we can figure out another solution?" Karen hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "It might work, but we'll need to be careful. Disrupting something like This could have unintended consequences. Ryan turned to Lucas. Do it. But make sure we can reactivate it later, if we need to. Lucas approached the pillar cautiously, pulling tools from his belt. He examined the pulsing lines carefully, searching for a weak point or control mechanism. As he worked, the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, their movements becoming more erratic. The air grew colder, and a low hum filled the chamber, growing louder with each passing second. Hurry up, Megan urged, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Something's not right. I'm going as fast as I can, Lucas snapped, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Just as the hum reached a deafening crescendo, he pressed a final button. The pillar shuddered violently, its light flickering, before dimming completely. The symbols on the walls froze mid-motion, leaving the chamber eerily silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the team let out a collective sigh of relief. They had done it, so they thought. But as they prepared to leave, a sudden tremor rocked the ship, throwing them off balance. Alarms blared throughout the vessel, accompanied by the sound of rushing air. Ryan grabbed onto a nearby railing, steadying himself as he shouted orders. What's happening? Karen cried, clutching her scanner. The hull integrity's failing, Lucas yelled, frantically checking his readings. We must have triggered something when we shut down the pillar. Get back to the airlock, Ryan commanded, already sprinting toward the exit. Now, the crew obeyed, racing through the corridors as the ship groaned and buckled around them. Sparks flew from exposed wires, and sections of the ceiling collapsed, forcing them to take alternate routes. Behind them, the eerie blue light Ritu. The ISS Vanguard drifted silently in the void, its sleek hull reflecting the faint glow of the dying star nearby. Inside, the crew sat in the briefing room, their faces pale and drawn as they processed what had happened aboard the derelict ship. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, each person lost in their own thoughts about the choices they'd made, and the consequences that might follow. Captain Ryan Holt stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, but his mind racing. We shut down the pillar, Ryan said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, though his hands gripped the edge of the table tightly. But we don't know if it's permanent or safe. Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. So what happens when it wakes up again? Or worse, when the ship falls apart entirely? Megan crossed her arms over her chest, her expression grim. We can't stay here waiting for answers. Either we go back in there and finish the job, or we cut our losses and leave. Ryan shook his head firmly. Leaving isn't an option, not yet. There are still people in those cryopods, people who might be able to tell us what happened. If we abandon them now, we're no better than whoever left them behind in the first place. Karen hesitated, then spoke up. There's another issue we haven't talked about. Those symbols there connected to something bigger, something old. I've seen patterns like this before, in ancient texts and artifacts. They're tied. Two stories about beings humans weren't meant to understand. Maybe the crew wasn't destroyed by some experiment gone wrong. Maybe they were punished. Megan asked sharply, raising an eyebrow. By who? Aliens? Ghosts? I don't know, Karen admitted. But think about it. Why would anyone build a ship like that and come all the way out here? What were they running from or toward? And why does it feel like the ship itself is watching us? Ryan frowned, considering her words. He had felt it too, this sense of being observed, of stepping into a place where humanity didn't belong. It wasn't just paranoia. It was real, almost tangible. Whatever force had claimed the crew of the derelict ship, it hadn't disappeared. It was waiting, watching. We need more information, Ryan said after a moment. If we're going to figure out how to help the survivors or stop whatever's affecting them, we need to dig deeper. Lucas, see if you can repair any of the ship's systems remotely. Maybe we can access logs or databases without setting foot inside again. Lucy's nodded, already pulling out his tools. I'll do my best, but the damage is extensive. Even if I manage to get partial access, it won't be easy. Do it anyway, Ryan ordered. Then he turned to Karen. You keep analyzing the data from the pillar. See if you can find anything that explains its purpose or how to control it safely. What about me? Megan asked, her tone sharp with impatience. She hated sitting idle while danger loomed nearby. You'll prepare the team for another mission, Ryan replied. If Lucas finds something useful or if the situation changes, we may need to act quickly. Be ready. Hours passed as the crew worked tirelessly, each person focused on their assigned task. Lucas managed to establish a tenuous connection to the derelict ship's central AI core, though the signal was weak and fragmented. As he patched through the feed, a distorted voice crackled to life, speaking in broken phrases. Solace online, awaiting command. The voice rasped, its tone mechanical, yet eerily human. Karen glanced at Ryan, her eyes wide. Is that the ship's AI? It has to be, Ryan confirmed, leaning closer to listen. Ask it what happened to the crew. Lucas typed a series of commands into his console, sending queries to the AI. After a long pause, the response came, slow and disjointed. Mission failed. Entity detected. Beyond comprehension. Crew compromised. Transformation initiated. Transformation, Megan echoed, her voice tight with unease. Like those creatures we saw. The AI continued, its words growing clearer, despite the static. Entity resides within. Symbiosis attempted. Rejected. Hostile takeover. Survivors placed in stasis. Attempting containment. Karen's breath caught in her throat. Containment? Of what? Before the AI could respond, the transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the room silent except for the hum of equipment. Ryan straightened, his jaw clenched. Whatever this entity is, it's still aboard that ship, and it's dangerous. Lucas exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. This is insane. We're dealing with something that shouldn't exist. How are we supposed to fight it? We adapt, Ryan said firmly. We learn everything we can and use it to our advantage. For now, focus on stabilizing the connection. See if you can pull up more details about the entity or the transformation process. While Lucas worked, Karen pored over the data she'd collected earlier, piecing together fragments of information about the symbols and the pillar. Her brow furrowed as she uncovered references to an ancient myth, a story about stars that weren't just celestial bodies, but sentient beings capable of influencing human destiny. According to legend, those who sought to harness their power risked losing themselves entirely. This isn't just science, Karen murmured, showing her findings to Ryan. It's mythology. These people weren't just experimenting, they were trying to communicate with something vast and incomprehensible, something that didn't want to be found. Ryan stared at the screen, his mind reeling. If Karen was right, then the crew of the derelict ship hadn't been victims of an accident. They had deliberately courted disaster, driven by ambition, or desperation, or both. And now, centuries later, their hubris threatened to consume anyone who stumbled upon their legacy. By the time Megan returned with an updated plan for re-entering the ship, Lucas had made progress. He managed to retrieve partial logs from the AI, detailing the final days of the crew. The entries painted a harrowing picture, scientists arguing over ethics, engineers warning of instability, and ordinary crew members pleading for evacuation, as the entity began to take hold. In the end, chaos had erupted, with factions turning on one another as paranoia and fear consumed them. The last log mentions a failsafe, Lucas reported, his voice tinged with hope. A way to neutralize the entity, but only if the pillar is fully operational. Ryan's expression hardened. That means we have to reactivate it. Risky as it is, we don't have a choice. Megan sighed heavily. Great, so we march right back into that death trap, turn the monster loose again, and pray it doesn't eat us this time. That's the plan, Ryan said dryly. But we'll do it carefully. Megan, arm your team with EMP charges. If things go sideways, we'll need a way to disrupt the entity's influence. And if that doesn't work, Megan pressed, then we improvise, Ryan replied simply. One step at a time. When they returned to the derelict ship, the air felt heavier than ever. The corridors creaked underfoot, and the emergency lights flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that danced along the walls. The crew moved cautiously, their weapons drawn, and their senses alert. Every sound seemed amplified, every movement suspect. Reaching the chamber with the crystalline pillar, they found it exactly as they'd left it, dark and silent, its surface etched with glowing lines that pulsed faintly. Karen approached it cautiously, her scanner humming softly as she analyzed its structure. It's stable enough to restart, she said after a moment. But once we do, we won't have much time. Ryan nodded, glancing at the others. Everyone knows their role. Let's make this count. As Karen activated the pillar, its blue light flared back to life, bathing the chamber in an otherworldly glow. The symbols on the walls began to shift and writhe once more, forming complex patterns that seemed to pulse with a heartbeat of their own. Then, suddenly, the holographic images returned only. This time, they showed something new. A massive shadow filled the room, towering above them like a living storm. Its form was indistinct, constantly shifting, but its presence was undeniable. Eyes or something resembling eyes glowed within its mass, locking onto each of them in turn. A low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber, vibrating deep in their chests. It's awake, Megan whispered, her weapon raised. The entity surged forward, tendrils of darkness lashing out toward the group. Ryan shouted orders, his voice cutting through the chaos as the team scrambled to execute their plan. Megan fired EMP charges, creating bursts of energy that momentarily disrupted the creature's form. Meanwhile, Lucas worked frantically to interface with the pillar, searching for the fail-safe mechanism. Almost there, Lucas yelled, his fingers flying over the controls. Karen stayed close to him, using her scanner to guide his efforts. It's hidden beneath the main system. You need to override the secondary protocols. The entity let out a deafening roar, its form expanding as it absorbed the EMP blasts. It lunged at Ryan, forcing him to dive out of the way. Megan opened fire, drawing its attention while Lucas completed the override sequence. Got it, Lucas shouted, slamming his fist onto the final button. The pillar emitted a high-pitched whine, its light intensifying until it became nearly blinding. The entity recoiled, its form collapsing inward, as if being pulled apart by an invisible force. For a moment, the chamber fell silent. Then, with a final flash of light, the entity vanished, leaving only the faint hum of the pillar behind. Ryan exhaled sharply, lowering his weapon. Did it work? Karen checked her scanner, her expression cautious.